please feel free to, if you have any questions during these sessions, just to like jump in. If you haven't been able to get to them in the past, in the last few days, then they're all up on YouTube. I've been posting the links in WhatsApp. So just please feel free to go and enjoy them that way. And if you go back and watch one of these sessions and then have a question, you can put it in the chat on WhatsApp or WhatsApp me directly, however you want to do it. So welcome to day 3. Now, this is probably something that I think people who haven't been involved in audio will still have a lot of good skills around this. And it's always good to kind of hear from people in terms of how they approach interviewing and field work. As you will have seen in what got sent out this morning, it does adjust to audio, but those kind of key skills of interviewing someone well, I think we've all been doing for a long time. Even when you sort of start, maybe I don't know about if everyone starts in print, but like back when I started, it was like print as in like actual printed paper. And that skill of being able to like interviewing someone, you kind of build up that skill over years, right? You get better at it. You get better at the different types of interviews that we're all aware of. Some of them are a bit more like gotcha interviews in terms of surprising someone who's in power or you're holding to account. But then you think that those are the most complicated interviews, but actually often like the ones that can be more difficult to you when you start out are actually the more emotional ones, which demand you to be more empathetic and more sensitive. And I think over time, you kind of learn how to do that. And I think anyone that's kind of taught interviewing skills, you can teach like tips and tricks in terms of being empathetic, in terms of mirroring what someone has said, like in terms of, like almost like a therapist, like you kind of clarify what someone has said and you say that back to them so they feel heard. You can do all those little things, but ultimately people want to feel heard. They want you to be empathetic because you're busy telling they're busy telling you their story, and they know it's not just to you, but it's to like what you will do with that story. And as we all know, there's that kind of responsibility of what you do with someone's personal story, which can be in some ways quite daunting. And you on the one hand, you might really want to protect your sources. Someone brought that up yesterday in terms of safety and security, and that's definitely an issue. But even if that isn't even in play in terms of someone's safety, you almost just want to preserve their story in a way that's respectable, right? That you respect that they took the time to tell you. And sometimes they might get quite emotional and they might cry. And I want to touch on that a little bit in terms of broadcast, in terms of audio a little bit later. So this is where we're at. We've talked about choosing the story on Monday. We talked about scripting. And now we're talking about interviewing in terms of going out and finding people and interviewing them. Now, the thing that sort of I touched on before is this idea of people being articulate, because if you're in print, you can interview someone quite extensively, and actually you can, without misquoting them, still using the same quotes, they can kind of still come across as quite articulate. However, that is much more difficult to kind of get around in broadcast, especially in audio. So you need to find the right people for your podcast. And the one tip that was said to me, which I think is very useful, is this idea of, say you need to interview someone about a traumatic event that's happened to them, and they are just not able to communicate it. And maybe it was too traumatic for them. Maybe it's just not easy for them to communicate that. What you can do, which is a good tip, is to find someone who's close to them, maybe a spouse, maybe a daughter or a son, someone like that, who might be able to basically tell their story for them. And the best way to sort of do that, I found, is to do that with them. So all 3 of you are basically in this interview, and someone, and you are interviewing probably an older person who isn't as good at communicating it, but then they will probably speak less than the spouse or maybe the son or niece or daughter, who can then really explain the details of the story. Because the thing that's going to make your story really come to life like we've spoken about before, is character, but also detail. Like that old school idea of like feature writing in terms of like what people had for breakfast on the first day of the trial. That's a kind of kind of old example, but you kind of want to know that, right? And you don't need to know that in other kinds of storytelling, in other kinds of journalism. But with this kind of stuff, like knowing what people are doing, knowing like the color of their shirt, even though it's in audio, that really helps like get something across. Like I did a story a while ago where I was interviewing a lot of private investigators, and those people are colorful characters, right? In the way that they speak, in what they say. But what adds another layer of that is like describing where they live. There was one guy who I interviewed a couple of times for that story, and he had like basically small sharks in a huge tank in his office, and that's not something that comes across well in audio. It wouldn't even really come across that well if you just like did a talking head video of him. But in terms of being able to describe the idea of these sharks, little sharks, but like little sharks like circling around in a tank to the left of him in his office, that really creates a different dimension to this guy and like what he means, what he's about. So, people that are old school journalists, this is not new information, but I guess I'm trying to reinvigorate everyone to kind of think more around kind of the fun parts of going out into the field and interviewing someone in terms of collecting that detail, collecting the little things. Because the thing that's interesting about audio is that like you can kind of hear something very specific on tape, but if you don't pair that with good voiceover that explains what they're hearing, they have no idea what they're hearing. Like it's actually, when you go back, it's actually shocking about how hard it is, unless it's something very specific, like a human voice, or there are some sounds like the jangling of keys, for example, like car keys. You really know what that sounds like, but quite often, unless I tell you what that sound is, you won't know what it is. And that sort of plays out in like silly games that people play, usually on phone-in radio shows and stuff like that, right? Like, what is the sound? However, if you pair good description with that sound, it becomes so vivid because it's almost like a magic trick. People are like, oh yeah, I know that's that sound. And then you get told it and it just blends together perfectly. More, I would argue, more vividly than if it was actually a visual. The other thing about audio, maybe more than video, is you got to record everything, and you've got to kind of ethically let everyone know that you're doing that. So if you're on the phone before you meet someone, it's good practice to say like, look, I'm going to be recording from the beginning, because you want those, as we've all heard on podcasts at this point, you want those introductions, you want the driving of your car or your footsteps up to the door where you meet your subject. And frankly, people might get a little bit, they usually have a conception of the idea of the interview is starting now, like almost like you're going on the 6 o'clock news. And the idea that you're kind of walking around with a recorder just already rolling before they've even said hello can be I mean, they're not going to do anything probably that is in any way incriminating, but people feel that they often want to put on their game face, if you like, and they want a couple of minutes to kind of to look at you like a human before they put on their game face. And that can be regardless of any interview. That doesn't have to be that people have anything to hide. People just feel, and it's understandable, right? However, you want that audio, you want that recording for your podcast. So I used to just record everything, and and if you get the sound of people saying hello, like people often don't even remember that or know. But I found that it's actually good practice to kind of just say in an email, if that's your contact with them, or a text, just so you know, because this is a podcast, I'm going to be recording everything from when I get there. So there's no like awkward thing of like, oh, is this on? Is it on? Obviously, we all know in terms of going off the record, if during that period they hit a point where they want you to turn it off and they want to go off the record, then that's a different thing, right? And it was always told to me that it's not that you should never do that, but you shouldn't do it readily. And I think that was good advice, right? Your job is to be on the record. You're a walking recorder, essentially, as a journalist. And the idea that someone wants to go off the record, I found it useful to do it when someone requests it, but to not be like, yeah, sure, of course, and then just do it. To be like, are you sure you want to do that? Just kind of give a little bit of a barrier to create a little bit of theatrics around this idea of going off the record. Nothing too dramatic, but I think you just need to communicate that obviously you don't want that. And that's fine to do that, but you will still do it, because as we all know, when people do that, then their guard drops, and then they might tell you something that I guess you can't use, especially in audio. You're not recording, you can't attribute to them. However, it can lead to other things and other exciting parts in the story. Where when you're doing this kind of documentary making in audio, you want that as much as possible. You want those leads. You want those little things that will then spark you to the next location, the next person, the next set of facts. And that's always what you're trying to do. Okay, so just at this point, are there any questions, any comments, anything anyone wants to say? Feel free.
Yes, I wanted to ask a question, Paul. Thank you for the summary about taking voice, and I regret that yesterday I wasn't there to participate on writing, because it's the most difficult part for me, but I will have time to listen to the recording.
Oh, no problem, no problem. Thanks for saying that.
On recording audio, what I wanted to discuss with you is about the time to begin, because in the course that you send, one of tips say that you have to record everything. I just see that when I record many things, I'm going to become lazy when I have to edit, because there is many sounds, and when you have sound, you begin to postpone when you will begin to edit. So how to know when to get a sound and when to not record anything?
Yeah, I mean, if I understand you right, I can totally appreciate that. You don't necessarily want so much audio. Is that what you're saying? In terms of, if you record everything, you end up with like 8 hours of audio that you now have to plow through. And I think the way to do that, I mean, some recorders allow you to put markers on, which I actually never use, but they do that. But really, the best way to do that is to always have like a small notepad and pen along with you. It can get kind of practically fumbly in terms of like holding a notepad and pen along with your recorder, but actually that's the best way. And to kind of just literally like signal on your piece of paper the time code of when something interesting happens. So if you just got like a small margin on your notepad of time codes where, and depending on how much time you have to write something down, then you don't even need to say what it is, but you will know when you go back, like, oh, these are the moments almost. And I would suggest on top of that, the idea of writing stuff down is really crucial for this, because like I say, like in terms of, to use that shark example, not that you would forget something like that, but you kind of want to document the detail which you're not picking up in audio, and you've got to do that by writing it down, essentially. What I find is, if it's not like a strict interview situation, because some people be okay with that, some people might not, but like I often find taking quick photos with your phone also really helps in terms of descriptions around like what people are wearing, how people are looking. There's often good character development to be mined from, like, if someone looks really tired, if someone et cetera, et cetera. So on the one hand, yes, I do appreciate the idea that you don't want loads and loads of audio, but I would say that you have to do that. Get extra batteries and just like be ready to do that. But to avoid this kind of insane, like just scrolling through hours of audio, make those notes for the timestamps, and then take some photos as well for the visuals. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. The idea of taking notes is very good. So the second question, if friend permit me to ask the second.
Sure.
Is how to match, because I work on sound, and we have to write text and to put inside this sound that we recorded. So how to match this kind of thing? You have text, you have to write your episode. Do you write all the episode? Because when I listen for some very good production like Daily of the New York Times, I have the impression that the podcast is perfect. So is the producer write all the lines of the podcast, or they can be sometimes just in improvisation and mix sound, text, and improvisation where they are recording?
Yeah, I mean, if I understand what you're saying in terms of like when you mean improvisation when people are talking, is that what you mean?
It's when I recorded. I have already my element.
Yeah.
But when I edit the text, did I have to write down all the phrases that I'll use in order to match in editing, in order to raconter mon histoire, I'd say in French, to tell my story. So did I have to write exactly all words that I'll use in text when I'll record the text that I write to compose my element?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the way I would sort of explain that is that it depends on your resources. You know, I'm sure the Daily transcribes, probably uses a program like Descript, and then probably has someone go through that Descript transcript to make sure of everything that they record, right? And they probably transcribe everything, and then use that in their editing process. What I would, I mean, and you can do that obviously, and sometimes when you're doing I find like quite complicated interviews that have a lot, that might, like really core interviews that might have a lot of information that you really want to comb over, I find that you kind of have to transcribe those. And in the last year, even, like, transcription software has become so much better than it was, even with people with strong accents in all different, not different languages is still difficult, but even if it's in English, in different, and French, if it's in a strong accent, it's actually very good at picking it up. But I would say that in terms of your editing, depending on the time constraints that you have, you don't have to do that, especially if it's something like, if we're going to use the Daily as an example, what you kind of wanting to do, I think, is a sort of shortcut to that is to think about the five or whatever that number is, 5 or 3 or 10, like really perfect moments that you have, that you've already can pinpoint without looking at notes, without anything, just like after you do an interview, you're like, okay, what were the 5 key moments or facts or something that came out with that? And I would suggest that you edit around, you prioritize highlighting in your edit those 5 things. Either you put them all at the front if you think that's how your audience is, or you kind of drip feed them out, or you cut everything out but those 5 things, depending on how much time you've got for your podcast or how much time those key points took to explain. And I would, and in terms of that, like, people kind of talk about this idea of like, something happens in the preparation, something happens in the production, like in terms of doing the interview, for example, and then everything gets remade in the edit. And that's kind of how I also think about it. Like, you can have lots of planning, then you can go and do the interview, and more different things can happen, unexpected things. And then essentially you're going to remake whatever it is you're making from scratch in some ways in the edit. And I think that's a good way to think about it. And I'm not trying to give you more work to do, but like, I think you, as an editor, depending on if you're editing and doing I mean, usually I do all these steps myself, and then have someone who does like post editing to kind of neaten it up. But I would say that you want that freedom when you're in the edit to kind of be impulsive, to change things that maybe you didn't think would happen, to change plans that you already made, You need to do all those things. So that's how I would approach the editing process. We're going to go into editing a little bit more closely later in this course, but it's also a difficult thing to do in a rapid, as anyone that's tried to do any audio editing or video editing, it's a very difficult thing to do in a very rapid period of time. So we will touch on it, but we'll also leave it open in the chat, and you can contact me afterwards if you still have questions around editing, because I understand it is just one of those processes that sometimes can take a long time to pick up.
Thank you, Paul.
Sure. Thanks for the questions. Okay, so the other thing I just wanted to touch on is lastly is just this idea of atmospheric sound. We talked about a little bit in terms of picking things up and in terms of like explaining them with narration, but also there is sort of a practice which you might not be familiar with if you've worked not in audio before, even if you've been in video, where in my experience, people are trying to actually get rid of all atmospheric sound. What you want is you want different tracks of atmospheric sound. So you don't want, for example, if you're say you're doing a story about bad pollution, right? You actually don't want to interview someone on the side of a road where there's bad pollution, because as you can expect, the sound will be terrible. You won't be able to hear anything they say. You will have communicated that you're at the side of a road which has lots of cars, which creates bad pollution, but ultimately you've just ruined your interview. The other way of doing it is to take your interview subject into a nice area. I was going to say air conditioned, but you actually don't want the air conditioning because that also ruins sound. Into a nice quiet area, interview them there, and then go back and get sound at the side of the road, that kind of thing. And I think there's an interesting debate to be had about how honest you are around where you are doing an interview and what sound you use and what that means. And I am for myself, I'm very strict in terms of not using fake sound in what I call like studio sound, like you go on YouTube and you get the sound of cars and then you pretend that you were at the side of a road or whatever. I'm very strict. I never use sound effects or kind of fake sound in that way. And I wouldn't say I was at the side of a road and then like dub it in to make that more dramatic, or, not that being at the side of the road is dramatic, but you know what I mean? Like in that way, you're not building, it's not a movie, like it's still a documentary and you don't want to be disingenuous. And I feel there is something really dishonest around pretending you were somewhere with your microphone when you weren't actually there. And that's just me. I mean, you can, I'm sure you've got podcast examples you can give me where people, very good podcasts where people have done that. And they use sound effects or they use like kind of fake sounds. And that's fine. I mean, there was one instance where we had to do it because we were in a courtroom and the lawyer said it was highly illegal, and it was just literally people standing and shuffling around, like the most it wasn't any voices of people speaking in the court, because I know you can't use that. But essentially I had like been recording my phone just to get the atmospheric sound inside a courtroom and walking through the courtroom doors, very basic stuff. And the lawyer who looked at it actually picked it up and was like, you can't use any sound, like you can't have been recording anything inside this courtroom. It's highly illegal to have done that. Well, it's highly illegal to publish that. I don't think it's illegal to do it. I mean, anyone who's been in a courtroom, you get shouted at if you look at your phone even, right? So you're not allowed to do it, but I don't think it's illegal, but it's illegal to publish it. So at that moment we used, and we deliberated about it a lot, but eventually we used fake courtroom sound. And it kind of broke my heart to do that, but that was the one time that we did it. So yeah, so that's just sort of one thing around atmospheric sound. And the other thing to kind of think about is you need to be careful around how you record that. Like you want to use microphones, or if you're using a phone, like the best quality instrument you can use to get that atmospheric sound. And you want to get kind of as close to that atmospheric sound as possible, but you also want to be conscious of things like the sound of your hands coming up on the microphone, the sound of all those things. So, it's not easy thing to get used to, but I would encourage you to wear headphones when you're out in the field for recording for your podcast. Makes you look a bit weird, which is the one thing, which isn't too bad. But the other thing is that it's actually, I find, makes you quite isolated. It's almost like putting on a spacesuit. You know, you kind of, even though you're hearing things, you also kind of lose your peripheral sound. And that can be quite just disjointing a little bit and something to get used to. But it does help in terms of just getting a better recording. Okay, so I just wanted to go into today's task, right? So I encourage you, I've called this like get out into the world, okay, this task. And I do encourage you to just basically pick up your recorder or your phone and find someone to interview for a minimum of 10 minutes and a maximum of 30 minutes. Okay, but the thing is you're not just interviewing them about their day. It can be about their day, but your aim is to get a specific story out of them. Okay, so it can be about their day, but it must have, like, in terms of what we were talking about yesterday, in terms of structure, a beginning, middle, and end. And humans are storytellers, even though people like to think only some of us are storytellers. Like all of us tell stories, some better than others. But it's difficult, even though it's so instinctive to people to tell stories, when they need to think about it and they need to do it almost for their job, it can be a little bit disorientating in terms of what is the beginning, middle, and end of this story. What is the best way to end it? What is the best way to start it? And you need to try and get that out of someone. So I don't want you to be talking for longer than 30 minutes. So that's kind of the cutoff, and a minimum of 10 minutes. But I want you to think about this as that the final product is not going to be the length that you're speaking, right? You're going to edit this down, right? We're going to go into editing later in the course, and we're going to think about how to edit this down to as small as possible while keeping the key parts of the story that are interesting. And as I say here, like, the good way to sense check this is, does the story have at least one strong character who changes in some way? And does the story also speak to a larger issue in the culture? Now, that idea of change is actually very difficult to find, right? But it's always good to aim high. And I always think, like, finding a strong character is one thing. You can find a strong character. The idea of a strong character who goes through some sort of change. So, for example, someone who is very bored with their job and despondent about the world, they, through a series of events, they become very motivated and they love their job and they love living in the world. That's a basic story arc. It's a change. Like, people go through something and then they change, and that, in a way, is for the better. And in that example, it's for the better. However, journalism isn't just about the micro, right? It's also about the macro. It's about not just small, intimate stories. It's also about the larger society. So really what you want is both those things. You want all three of those things. You want a strong character. You want that arc that someone goes through, but you want that arc to somehow speak to a larger issue, and that depends on if your issue is positive or if it's negative, depending on if the story is positive or negative. I mean, you can do one or the other, right? You can have an arc where someone fights against the criminal justice system and gets out of jail, but actually the larger story, the larger issue, is actually that the criminal justice system is pretty broken because it took them so long to get out of jail, for example, right? So it doesn't have to be that even with a positive micro arc, that the macro arc means that the society is great or there's a positive thing. Often, like, as journalists, we're trying to expose things that are not good. So you can have a satisfying, almost positive story, but it can still create something where you look back on it and go, well, that guy shouldn't have been in jail anyway. So anyway, so this is just a small exercise for you to kind of, and if you, and it's up to you. It depends on if you've done interviewing very recently. Maybe you can use something that you've done already. If you haven't, and you're not used to this kind of beginning, middle, and end kind of storytelling, then I encourage you to kind of look at this example and to kind of do it in that way. Are there any other questions or anything else to kind of highlight at this point for anyone? Okay, so that's those are the main things that I kind of wanted to bring up. I just wanted to lastly encourage people to if they have friends who are we're taking sort of sets of people to do this course, and we're filling up a new group who'll be doing it in a few weeks' time. If you've got people that are in your communities and you want them to and you think that they'd be interested in this course, then please just put them in contact with me and I will sign them up for it. I'll make sure that they get on it. You can send them my WhatsApp number, or my email address is, if you're getting these emails, then you have my address. But I'll put my email address in the WhatsApp group as well. And they could just drop me a line. That's good. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, go for it.
I just have one last question.
Sure.
About an investigative podcast.
Yeah.
When we talk about that kind of subjects, what matter is more useful to produce a podcast, an audio podcast, or to not choose? Because, for example, I live in Democratic Republic of Congo, where there is many things that happen, but you'll be okay with me if I say that I can choose all subjects to produce a podcast. So, in your opinion, about your experience, what kind of subject is going on with podcast, and what kind that's not going on with podcast, with the format of podcast?
Yeah, so you're asking kind of like what, you've got a lot of different stories that you can tell, and you're sort of asking what would fit in with podcast trends, essentially. Yeah, I mean, true crime, if you like, is the most popular genre of podcasts, and I think, and I mean, I've done some series that have got crimes in them, and I get quite I guess defensive when people try and put them in a true crime box, because to me, true crime is, I don't know, it just sort of signifies like low quality in some ways, I guess. And I don't know if that's, I mean, that's not fair, because I know like some very good true crime podcasts. So that's not fair at all. It's just sort of my kind of instant sort of emotion around it. And I don't think that's fair. So something that would fit in that genre, I think maybe, I mean, we can maybe chat about it offline. I mean, online, but off this call a little bit. But in my mind, in terms of what you should be choosing, is sort of those broader things that we were talking about yesterday, in that you've got a lot of topics to choose from, but you want to look for something that has longevity in terms of episodes, in terms of strong characters, in terms of having lots of twists and turns in the story. And I think to be fair, if you're telling something explicitly about your country, that you're kind of acknowledging that the people that are listening to it in maybe the UK or the US have not been to, or not been to outside of being a tourist, then I don't think you have to pander. I don't think you have to, on the one hand, I don't think you have to pander to specific things that they might think are in your country. And I don't think you have to have a kind of, there's a trend, especially around certain podcasts that have made about Africa by European companies, where there pretty much has to be a white European character in the story, and I strongly do not agree with that. However, I do think that the more complicated your story is, and the more the less likely that people in the US and UK have been, if there is a less likely chance that they've been to your country, then you have to kind of lean heavily on it just being a good story. And I don't mean I guess I don't mean an important story, because from what you're sort of saying, you've got a whole range of very important issues and stories. I'm saying an engaging, satisfying story, regardless of where it's set. I think the mistake is to be I think, and I guess people know this, right? But especially for a US market, your US market will not care just because it's in, they're more likely to care about something in the US, right? That's basically how they are. So it's actually, it's too, if you're not in the US, it's already, even if you're in the UK and you're trying to appeal to a US market, it's already to your disadvantage because, you know, US people mostly want to hear about people in their own country, right? However, I do think that if you have a strong story in terms of all the things we've been talking about, it can completely break through internationally. And I don't think you need those elements. I don't think you need like a US character. But I think the distinction is that idea of an important story that you might think is important. And I think it has to be important anyway, right? That's not what I'm saying. It shouldn't be not important. But you need to probably choose stronger in terms of it just being like an amazing tale to tell. Where if you could swap all the characters for American people and the country for the US, it would still work as a very exciting story. And I think that's the key. Does that answer your question?
Wait, thank you, Paul.
Okay, we're just about to run out of time, but thank you very much, everyone. I will put this up on YouTube later this evening, and I'll speak to you tomorrow.